If you've been with me before, you know how this works. If you haven't, this is how this works. I pick up a book and read it. I'm not going to edit. If something weird happens in the middle of my reading, if I fumble a word, if the phone rings, that's part of the experience. And with that, Rascal by Sterling North, first published in 1963. For Gladys, my constant companion in watching our wilderness world. Preface. A very interesting book could be written about the raccoon, and with its industrious energy and resourcefulness, it deserves to be elevated to the status of the national emblem in place of the parasitical, carrion-feeding bald eagle, says Ivan T. Sanderson in Living Mammals of the World. First, a bit about Sterling North himself. North was born on the second floor of a farmhouse on the shores of Lake Koshkonong, a few miles from Edgerton, Wisconsin, in 1906. Surviving a near-paralyzing struggle with polio in his teens, he grew to young adulthood in the quiet southern village in Wisconsin of Edgerton, which North transformed into the Brailsford Junction setting of several of his books. After attending the University of Chicago, North worked as a reporter for the Chicago Daily News, the New York World Telegram, and the New York Sun, before becoming a freelance writer. One of North's first books, The Pedro Gorino, was published in 1929 and was the narrative of the life of Harry Dean, an African-American sea captain. A 1934 novel, Plowing on Sunday, featured a rare dust jacket illustration by the Iowa artist Grant Wood. North's book, Midnight in Jeremiah, was made into the Disney movie So Dear to My Heart in 1949. This movie was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song for Burl Ives' version of the 17th century English song Lavender Blue. In addition, North wrote Abe Lincoln, Log Cabin to the White House, The Wolfling, a documentary novel about the 1870s, Raccoons Are the Brightest People, Hurry Spring, and many other books. North's best-selling and best-known work, Rascal, a memoir of a better era, was published by E. P. Dutton in August of 1963. It is a remembrance of a year in his childhood when he raised a baby raccoon, which he named Rascal. It received a Newbery Honor in 1964, a Sequoia Book Award in 1966, and a Young Reader's Choice Award also in 1966. It was made into the Disney movie of the same name in 1969. Additionally, it was made into a 52-episode Japanese anime series entitled, oh boy, Araguma Rasukaru in 1977. Might want to check that out. The success of the anime was responsible for the introduction of the North American raccoon into Japan. In addition to chronicling North's raising of a raccoon, Rascal also highlights his loving relationship with his attorney father, dreamer David Willard North, and the aching loss represented by the death of his mother, Elizabeth Nelson North. In the 1990s, North's childhood home at 409 West Roland Street in Edgerton, Wisconsin, was restored to its 1917 appearance by the Sterling North Society and transformed into a museum. A bronze sign in the front of the home, marking North's significance in the history of the southern Wisconsin community, was dedicated in October 1984. Money for the sign was contributed by the school children of Rock County, the Edgerton Area Chamber of Commerce, and many friends of Sterling North. Sterling North died on December 21st, 1974, at the age of 68. Chapter 1. May. It was May 1918 that a new friend and companion came into my life. A character, a personality, and a ring-tailed wonder. He weighed less than 1 pound when I discovered him, a furry ball of utter dependence and awakening curiosity. unweaned and defenseless. Wowzer and I were immediately protective. We would have fought any boy or dog in town who sought to harm him. Wowzer was an exceptionally intelligent and responsible watchdog, guarding our house and our lawns and gardens and all my pets. But because of his vast size, 170 pounds of muscled grace and elegance, he seldom had to resort to violence. He could shake any dog on the block as a terrier shakes a rat. Wowzer never started a fight, but after being challenged, badgered, and insulted, he eventually would turn his worried face and great sad eyes upon his tormentor, and, more in sorrow than anger, grab the intruder by the scruff of the neck and toss him into the gutter. Wowzer was an affectionate, perpetually hungry St. Bernard. Like most dogs of his breed, he drooled a little. In the house he had to lie with his muzzle on a bath towel, his eyes downcast as though in slight disgrace. Pat Delaney, a saloon keeper who lived a couple of blocks up the street, said that St. Bernards drool for the best possible of reasons. He explained that in the Alps these noble dogs set forth every winter day with little kegs of brandy strapped beneath their chins to rescue lost wayfarers in the snowdrifts. Generations of carrying the brandy, of which they have never tasted so much of a drop, have made them so thirsty that they continuously drool. The trait had now become hereditary, Pat said, and whole litters of bright and thirsty little St. Bernards are born drooling for brandy. On this pleasant afternoon in May, Wowzer and I started up the first street toward Crescent Drive, where the semicircle of late Victorian houses enjoyed a hilltop view. Northward lay miles of meadows, groves of trees, a winding stream, and the best duck and muskrat marsh in Rock County. As we turned down a country lane past Bardine's orchard and the vineyard, the signature of spring was everywhere. Violets and anemones in the grass, the apple trees in promising bud all along the bough, and a big sneeze. Yep, clearly spring allergies. Ahead lay some of the most productive walnut and hickory trees I have ever eluded, a good swimming hole in the creek, and, in one bit of forest, a real curiosity, a phosphorescent stump which gleamed at night with foxfire, as luminescent as all the lightning bugs in the world, ghostly and terrifying to boys who saw it for the first time. It scared me witless as I came home one evening from fishing. So I made a point to bring my friends that way on other evenings, not wishing to be selfish about my pleasures. Oscar Sunderland saw me as I passed his bleak farmhouse far down that lane. He was a friend of mine who knew enough not to talk when we went fishing, and we were trapping partners on the marsh. His mother was a gentle Norwegian woman who spoke English with no trace of an accent, and also her native language. His father, Herman Sunderland, was another kettle of Haffenspfeffer, German on his mother's side and Swedish on his father's, with a temper and a dialect all his own. Oscar's mother baked delicious Norwegian pastries, particularly around Christmas time. Sometimes, in placing before me a plate of her delicacies, she would say something tender to me in Norwegian. I always turned away to hide the shameful moisture in my eyes, as Mrs. Sunderland knew my mother had died when I was 7, and I think that was why she was especially kind to me. Oscar's tough old father presented no such problem. I doubt that he had ever said anything kind to anyone in his entire life. Oscar was very much afraid of him, and risked a whipping if he were not at home in time to help with the milking. No one was concerned about the hours I kept. I was a very competent 11-year-old. If I came home long after dark, my father would merely look up from his book to greet me vaguely and courteously. He allowed me to live my own life, keep pet skunks and woodchucks in the backyard and the barn, pamper my tame crow, my many cats, and my faithful St. Bernard. Wowzer. He even let me build my 18-foot canoe in the living room. I had not entirely completed the framework, so it would take another year at least. When we had visitors, they sat in easy chairs surrounding the canoe, or skirted the prow to reach the great shelves of books that were continuously lending. We lived alone and liked it, cooked and cleaned in our own fashion, and paid little attention to the indignant housewives who told my father that this was no way to bring up a child. My father agreed amicably that this might be true, and then returned to his endless research for a novel concerning the Fox and Winnebago Indians, which, for some reason, was never published. I'm headed for Wentworth's Woods, I told Oscar, and I may not start home before moonrise. Wait a minute, Oscar said. We'll need something to eat. So he returned swiftly, with a paper sack filled with coffee cake and cookies that I knew he had swiped. You'll get a licking when you get home. Ishkabibble, I should worry, Oscar said, a happy grin spreading across his wide face. We crossed the creek on the stepping stones below the dam. Pickerel were making their seasonal run up the stream, and we nearly caught one with our hands as he snaked his way between the stones. Killdeer started up from the marshy shadows, crying, Killdeer! 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 As though a storm were brewing. Wowzer had many virtues, but he was not a hunting dog. So we were much surprised when in Wentworth's Woods he came to a virtual point. Oscar and I waited silently while the great St. Bernard, on his great paws, padded softly to the hollow base of a rotten stump. He sniffed the hole critically, then turned around and whined, telling us plainly that something lived in that den. Dig him out, Wowzer! I shouted. He won't dig, Oscar predicted. He's too lazy. You just watch, I said loyally, but I wasn't betting my glass marbles. In another minute, Wowzer was making the dirt fly, and Oscar and I were helping in a frenzy of excitement. We scooped the soft earth up with our hands and used our pocket knives when we came to some old decaying roots. I'll bet it's a fox, I panted hopefully. Hopefully an old woodchuck, Oscar said. But we couldn't have been more surprised when a furious mother raccoon exploded from her lair, screaming her rage and dismay. Wowzer nearly fell over backward to avoid the flying claws and slashing little teeth. A moment later, the big raccoon had racked her way up a slender oak tree. 30 feet above us, she continued to scream and scold. In plain sight now, within the den, we found 4 baby raccoons. A month old, perhaps. The entire litter of kits might have easily fitted into my cap. Each tail had 5 black rings. Each small face had a sharp black mask. 8 bright eyes peered up at us, filled with wonder and worry, and from 4 inquiring little mouths came whimpered questions. Good old Wowzer, I said. That's a pretty good dog you got there, Oscar admitted. But you better hold him back. He wouldn't hurt them. He takes care of all of my pets. In fact, the big dog settled down with a sigh of satisfaction, as near to the nest as possible, ready to adopt one or all of these interesting little creatures. But there was another service he could not render. He could not feed them. We can't take them home without their mother, I told Oscar. They're too young. Well, how do we catch their mother? Oscar asked. We draw straws. And then what? The one who gets the short straw shinnies up the tree and catches her. Oh, no, Oscar said. Oh, no, you don't. I ain't that crazy. Come on, Oscar. No, siree. But at just this moment, the 4 little raccoons set up such a plaintive wavering that we all felt miserable. We had to catch that mother raccoon. Wowzer was as sad as I was. He pointed his big muzzle toward the evening sky and howled mournfully. Well, Oscar said, kicking his shoe into the fresh earth. I'd better be getting home to help with the milking. Quitter, I taunted. Who's a quitter? You're a quitter. Well, okay. I'll draw straws. But I think you're loony. I held the straws, and Oscar drew the long one. Naturally, I had to live up to my bargain. I looked far above me. In the fading glow of the sunset, there she was still. 20 pounds of ring-tailed dynamite. I patted Wowzer as though for the last time, and began my tough scramble up that slender trunk. As I shinnied up the tree in no great hurry to tangle with the raccoon, I had one piece of good fortune. The full moon began to rise above the eastern hill, giving me a little more light for my dangerous maneuver. Far out on the first limb, the outraged animal took a firm stance, facing me, her eyes glowing balefully in the moonlight. I'm going to cut off the branch with my jackknife, I told Oscar. Yeah, and then what? You're supposed to catch her when she falls in the hazel brush. Oscar suggested that I had bats in my belfry. But he took off his corduroy jacket and prepared to throw it over the raccoon in a do-or-die effort for which he had little enthusiasm. Whittling through 2.5 inches of white oak with a fairly dull jackknife was a laborious process, as I soon discovered. I was in a cramped position, holding on with my left hand and hacking away at the wood with my right, and I feared the raccoon might try to rush me when the limb began to break. The moon rose slowly through the trees as blisters rose slowly on my right hand, but I couldn't weaken now. From far below came the whimpering of the raccoon kits, and the occasional mournful howl from Wowzer. Tree toads and frogs in the swamp began their chorus, and a little screech owl, sounding almost like another raccoon, added to the eerie tremolo. How are you coming? Oscar asked. Coming fine. Get ready to catch her. Count on me, Oscar said with his voice less convincing than his brave words. The tasseled limb of the white oak sighed at last, and broke with a snap, and drifted down to the hazel brush below. Oscar tried. I will give him credit for that. He tangled for 5 seconds with that raccoon, and then retreated with a damaged jacket. 3 of the little raccoons, hearing their mother's call, trundled with amazing swiftness into the hazel brush to follow her, and were gone. Oscar, however, was quick enough to cup one kit in his cap, our only reward for our labor. But reward enough, as time would prove. As nearly as we could tell, the handsome, sharply marked little animal was covered with only the soft gray fur of underfur, having few of the darker guard hairs which later gleam on the adult raccoon. He was the only baby raccoon I have ever held in my hands. And as he nestled upward like a quick chick and nuzzled like a puppy seeking his mother's milk, I was overwhelmed with the ecstasy of ownership and frightened by the enormous responsibility we had assumed. Wowzer romped beside us through the moonlight, often coming to sniff and lick the new pet we had found. This bit of mass mischief, which had stolen his heart as well as my own. He's yours, Oscar said sadly. My old man would never let me keep him. He shot a coon once in the chicken house just a few weeks ago. Well, you can come and see him, I suggested. Sure. Yeah, I can come and see him. We walked in silence for the time, thinking of the injustices of the world that made so few allowances for the nature of raccoons and boys of our age. And then we began talking about all the raccoons we had ever seen, and how we would feed this kid and teach him all the things that he would have to learn. I seen a mother raccoon once with 5 kits, Oscar said. What were they doing? She was leading them through along the edge of the stream. They did everything she did. Well, like what? Like feeling around with their paws, hunting for crawdads, I guess. On the horizon, there were flashes of distant lightning and rolling low thunder, sounding like artillery many miles away. It reminded us that the war was still raging in France, and that maybe my brother Herschel was being moved up to the front. I hated to think about that terrible war, which had been killing and wounding millions of men ever since the year my mother died. Here we were, safe and remote from the war, and worrying about such small and unimportant things as whether Oscar would get a whipping when he got home, and how to feed and raise a little raccoon. As we came up the lane towards Sunderland's farmhouse, Oscar began saying, "Ishkabibble, I should worry." But he acted worried to me. When we reached his front yard, he dared me and double dared me to go up and knock on the door. Meanwhile, he hid behind a flowering spiraea bush and waited to see what might happen. Oscar was wise to let me do the knocking. Herman Sunderland came storming out, swearing in German and Swedish. He was certainly angry with Oscar, and he didn't seem to like me very much either. "Where is that no good son of mine?" "It wasn't Oscar's fault," I said. "I asked him to come with me for a walk, and—" "Where is he now?" "Well," I said. "Well. What you mean, well?" "We dug out a den of raccoons," I said, "and here is the one we brought home." "Coons!" shouted Sunderland. "Verdammit varmints!" I was afraid that Mr. Sunderland might flush Oscar from behind the spiraea bush, but at just this moment Oscar's gracious mother came out on the front porch, the moonlight shining on her silvering hair. "Go to bed, Herman," she said quietly. "I will take care of this. Come out, Oscar, from behind that bush." To my surprise, Oscar's father meekly obeyed, taking a lamp up that long, dark parlor stairway, his shadow much taller than himself. And Oscar's mother took us to the kitchen, where she fed us a warm supper and began to heat a little milk to the temperature that would be right for a human baby. "It is hungry, the little one," she said, petting the small raccoon. "Go fetch a clean wheat straw, Oscar." She filled her own mouth up with warm milk, put the wheat straw between her lips, and slanted the straw down to the mouth of the little raccoon. I watched, fascinated, as my new pet took the straw eagerly and began to nurse. "Look how the little one eats," Oscar's mother said. "This is the way you will have to feed him, Sterling."